So for the most part, this series on what weapons could win a major tournament is here to talk about underrepresented weapons that have shown potential and gotten some amount of results but haven't completely won. However, there is one underrepresented weapon that's a little bit different because it won 3 big tournaments already. Today, I want to talk about how Dualie Squelcher proved it could win a major. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started with talking about the strengths of the weapon. Like with last time, this isn't going to be a full, in-depth breakdown of the weapon. Instead, I want to talk about the 2 main things that I think make it distinct from other options. The first of which being its mobility. Now, mobility is something that a lot of weapons in Splatoon have, but I think what's important to understand is typically the longer range your weapon has, the less mobility you have, and thus mobility becomes more and more important the more range you have. This makes Dualie Squelcher the most mobile non-short range weapon in the entire game, because that's its weapon's identity. Not just having 2 dodge rolls, but having the rolls be slides, which can either allow you to slide or use the jump tech to jump out of it with improved accuracy, both of which make Dualie Squelcher incredibly difficult to hit compared to normal dualies, which are always going to have at least some amount of end lag at the end of their dodge rolls, paired with the range this weapon has, and it has an insane amount of control over the fights it wants to take. This makes it very common for the skirmishing job, where the weapon's job is basically take attention from the opponents and don't die. Dualie Squelcher is very good at doing that. The other factor that makes it unique is paint, at least for the roll. Most mid-range weapons don't really have that great paint. Some of them are so bad that you need a lot of weapons in the comp to make up for it, like Squeezer or range blasters for instance. Dualie Squelcher is not one of those weapons. This thing paints a lot for a mid-range weapon, and what that means is that the other weapons in the team have to be less responsible for paint, which is going to open up other, more flexible options to be able to use other tools, and I'll get into that more later when we get into its comps. However, Dualie Squelcher has 2 big problems, which pretty much explain away why there's so few people using it. The first one is the weapon's damage. Dualie Squelcher has rather horrible damage. Not only is it a 4-shot with some pretty bad weapon spread, but it also only does 28 damage. 4-shot weapons typically want to have at least 30 damage because it works with a lot of other weapons in the game to be able to combo for a quicker kill. There's a lot of weapons in the game that either do 70 damage or do 35 damage, or 70 in 2 hits. And Dualie Squelcher does not get to one-shot kill off of any of it. This means that while the weapon is pretty good at taking fights, it doesn't really have any ways of reliably killing people quickly, and it's very dependent on the rest of its team to make up for that. Another thing the rest of the team has to make up for is the specials department. Dualie Squelchers, in terms of their weapon kits, have fine subs. Spot Bomb and Beacon for it totally work, though with the ink consumption of the main weapon are a little bit difficult to use until Last Ditch is active. Beacon is at least a somewhat unique sub for the weapon, as not many strong options have access to it, but I don't think Beacon is anything particularly special right now. It takes a long time to set up in such a fast-paced game that I think the downsides outweigh having the extra jumps a lot of the time. The specials are not great. The best thing I can say about them is you can quickly use them and go back to using your main gun, so it doesn't stop you from doing Dualie Squelcher things. Outside of that, you have Super Chumps, which at least paints a lot, but that's not really a problem for any Dualie Squelcher comp right now. And that's really all Chump does very well. So because its paint isn't really that needed, we don't really see it that much outside of a few beacon maps. It doesn't help that it's also 2 10 points for special with a 10-second cooldown. It's also worth noting, remember how I mentioned that 35 and 70 damage doesn't work with Dualie Squelcher barely? Guess what the damage numbers on Super Chump are? Yeah, we fixed that with Zap 89, so it works, but not for this weapon. The vanilla kit, on the other hand, which is by far the main one seeing use right now, has Wave Breaker, which is at least a little bit better. Wave's damage is enough to allow it to 2-shot opponents, which does help a little bit with its main problem. However, Wave Breaker is not difficult to avoid and doesn't do a whole lot else. At least the synergy is definitely there. Trying to take out a Dualie Squelcher rolling around while also dealing with Wave Breaker is a lot harder, so it stacks on the weapon's survivability, and dealing with sharking a little bit is not a bad trait. It's just not inherently that good at what it does. The comps clearly have a lot to make up for. So what have we been seeing from these big tournament wins? The first weapon to pair with this is Pencil, which should not be a surprise. I'm not even going to talk about it very much because this will not be the only video in the series that has Pencil basically being a mandatory slot for it. You are going to see it because it is Pencil. Unless a patch happens anyway that nerfs it. Outside of that though, the main pair with it has been either Splash or Slosher. Splash is a lot more common, and probably makes the most sense to work with it. I've mentioned that Dualie Squelcher's paint opens up a little bit more flexibility for the support, and Splash is the best weapon to take care of that, with Burst Bombs both helping Dualie Squelcher's damage and its own damage, and Crab Tank being very good to hold space, be aggressive, or add on to the survivability of the comp. It is the most flexible support right now, so it naturally works very well with a weapon that gives it a lot of freedom to do so. Slosher with it was used as well a little bit, and I think it's mostly just because Slosher is very good. You get AoE, you get some big damage, even if Dualie Squelcher doesn't get to work with it perfectly, and probably most importantly, you get access to Tri-Strike, which you wouldn't really be able to get normally because this isn't the type of weapon that wants to work with Neo Splash, another weapon that has big damage problems. So this is by far the easiest Tri-Strike weapon to slot into comps, which is pretty important when it's arguably the best special in the game right now. Finally though, the last slot has been either Roller or Carbon. Both of these work with Dualie Squelcher for the main reason that Dualie Squelcher is very good at baiting and taking fights, so oftentimes it'll distract other players for Rollers to be able to find kills in. It's excellent bait, and Roller is great at cleaning and taking all these fights that Dualie Squelcher will struggle to close out quickly. That alone makes them pretty good, but the kits only add to that. Vanilla Roller's Bubble gives some much needed survivability, and it's excellent for Dualie Squelcher to jump to, and Carbon has the Burst Bombs to help work with Dualie Squelcher and Azuka. I do think there's one option that's better than both Rollers though, and that's Mint Decapitator, another weapon that'll probably be in a lot of these video lists. Mint's 80 damage Charge Slash is one of the few things in the game that allow Dualie Squelcher to one-tap afterward, and you can still also just bait for Mint to play for one-shots or damage combos. With that, you have a weapon with a lethal bomb and the ability to paint decently well, and you still get to keep the bubble, so you have even more flexibility and freedom for whatever extra weapon you slot with it. In my opinion, this is the best weapon to pair with Mint in the game, honestly, and I think we're going to see more of it as people learn more of this weapon. At the end of the day, I think the 9.1 patch nerfing some of the weapons like Squeezer that have been heavy competition for the weapon, better comps with newer options allowing it to thrive more, and the incredibly notable strengths the weapon has to work around in the first place allows Dualie Squelcher to get these major tournament wins in the hands of good players. This is still a very uncommon weapon, and even though it's proven it can win so much, I think it's going to continue to be uncommon. Most of these results come from Kamachan, a 4000 XP Dualie Squelcher player who has been very dedicated to the weapon for a while, and while there are some other results with the weapon from other players that are notable, it's definitely still one person spearheading the weapon. But it is cool to see one of these weapons really definitively prove that it can work in multiple events in a row, definitively slating that it is a very good weapon worth picking if you dedicate the time to it. And for a weapon with as unique and special a design as Dualie Squelcher, I think that's perfect for it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll see you all next time.